everyone, and welcome to our breakup club. So some of you may have joined one of our sessions before, so welcome back if so, and also welcome to those who are joining for the very first time. If it is your first time, then you can see all of the previous breakup club episodes on the Stowe Family Law YouTube page. So today, as you well know from signing up, we are focusing on parenting after separation and divorce. So we do feel this is such an important topic, as once you're a parent, even if you do separate, you do have to maintain some form of relationship and connection with the other parent in order to be able to co-parent those children. And we fully understand that in some cases it's easier said than done. So we are hoping today that we will be able to give you some practical tips and information that you can take away and use in your particular scenarios. So just a little bit of housekeeping just before we do some formal introductions. We do have a Q&A function, and we'll be hosting a Q&A in the last 15 minutes of this webinar. So you can put your questions in the chat box, so please use that freely, but we do ask that it just stays friendly and it's a safe space for everybody. Of course, you will likely have different questions that you want to answer, which is absolutely fine, but certain questions may overlap with others, and we're all here just to get some information and advice, so let's just keep that as friendly as we can. The webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto the Stowe YouTube channel after this, and a link will be sent out to you all. We probably will have a lot of questions, so we'll try and go through as many as possible. But if we don't get to yours, then hopefully the previous topics that we've covered in our scenarios and the other Q&A questions that we go through will answer your question. And if not, then you can contact our Stowe support link and they will be able to arrange a call with our client care team for one of our lawyers to give you a call back. So who are we? So my name is Sophie Croft. I'm an associate in the Newcastle team, and I specialise in all areas of family law, but the vast majority of my caseload is children-based. So I deal with all sorts of children issues. Often this relates to child arrangements, relocation issues, whether that be a relocation in the UK or abroad, and more complex cases where we are dealing with kind of safeguarding concerns and domestic violence issues as well. So I'm a member of Resolution, which is an organisation which aims to deal with separations in the most amicable way possible, especially where children are concerned. And I've also got an accreditation with Resolution in private children law and advocacy in children law, which relates to representation at court. So I'll just hand over now to my colleague Orla to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Orla O'Connor and I am a solicitor here at Stowe Family Law. So a little bit about my background. Previous to joining Stowe back in October 2023, I primarily worked in public law care proceedings cases for around 4 years, which is where the local authority becomes involved with a family, normally due to some safeguarding concerns that they have. As well as private children's proceedings, which is what the primary focus of today is. And as you're probably all aware, that's normally when parents have disagreements around child arrangements and either need some legal advice or potentially the court's intervention to resolve those issues. So although I cover a lot of areas of family law, divorce, financial separation, domestic abuse, the Children Act proceedings have always been my bread and butter. And my goal really with every case is to ensure that I build a good rapport with my clients and ultimately put them in a place that when the case is concluded that they leave happier than when they first came to me. Similarly to Sophie, I do approach my cases with the resolution in mind. My job is not to make an already tenuous situation worse, but rather lower the temperature and face any of those disagreements with a level-headed approach. I'll pass now over to Nina.
Hi, I'm Nina. I'm a parenting coach, a researcher and an author. My area of research is looking at attachment relationships and how they can support autonomy. So basically looking at how by creating secure bonds with our children, we can support them to feel more empowered throughout their lives. And I'm a big believer in listening to children's voices and empowering them to sort of feel able to participate in decisions that affect them. I run kind of one-to-one sessions, and I also do classes as well on a Sunday evening. I'll pass over to Kate.
Angharad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, certainly. Hello, I'm Dr. Angharad Rudkin. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working with families and their children for about 25 years now. A lot around mental health stuff. And in the last sort of 10 years, been working more and more with families going through separation. And with Bob and Rebecca at Only Mums and Dads, we've set up training programs for family law professionals about how to talk to children, what about neurodiversity, trauma. So just bringing loads of sort of psychology things into the family law arena. And having seen and worked with the impact of separation on children a lot, I'm here to try and share that experience and also to be helping you to think about kind of going forward with children and how to best support them when you go through separation.
Great, thank you everybody. So we will kick off today's session with answering some questions that have already been sent in to us in advance. Once we've gone through a few of those, then we'll answer some of the live questions. You can submit those in the chat like Sophie said. So scenario number one. So this person has written, my daughter, aged 13 years, was recently diagnosed with autism and ADHD. Her father and I have recently separated, but she doesn't know it yet. And she's very worried about how to handle the transition for her daughter. She is even considering staying with him until she is older to limit any damage. What is the best way to handle this? Does anybody want to go first?
I'm very happy to go first with that, Orla. Yeah, so telling your child that you're separating is going to be tricky anyway. It's a conversation that none of us think we're ever going to need to have with our children. But when your child is neurodivergent, and it means that they may see the world a little bit differently, feel things a little bit differently, and have different perspectives on things, then it could be even more of a challenging thought to do it. My sense is if you and your partner have already decided that you're separating, it will be very, very hard to just hang on in there for the next few years. And unhappy parents are something that is probably more likely to make your children unhappy, really. So probably children are better off with happier parents who are separated. But there are ways of telling your child. So the first thing I would say to remember is that this isn't going to be a one-off conversation. It's not the one and only time you're going to be talking about this. You don't have to get it word perfect. In this first conversation, it's about introducing what is going on, answering any initial questions, reassuring your child that it's not their fault and that there's nothing that they've done wrong and it's not because of them, but it's because as two parents, we've sort of grown apart and fallen out of love with each other. And even though that has happened, we're still very much your mum and dad or whatever you call yourselves to your child. So I would say this is the first of many conversations. Maybe rehearse how are you going to say it. You can maybe write down some notes if you want. And then, as we know with children, it never quite goes according to plan. So she'll probably come up with a complete curveball about what she asks you or what does this mean. And you don't have to have all the answers at all. So you can say, we're really not quite sure how to answer that right now, but as soon as we do, we'll let you know. We know for some children who are neurodivergent, they like to deal with certainties and absolutes, and that's very hard to create at a time like this. But where you can, just give the assurance of sameness. So we're really going to work hard for you to still be at the same school and still do the things that you enjoy doing. We'll work very hard to have two comfortable homes which meet your needs, whether they're sensory needs, emotional needs. So while you can't offer a huge amount of certainty, you can certainly let her know that you're going to make sure that this is something that you work hard for. So I guess they would be my top tips for a difficult scenario, but one that I think you can get through with a few guiding principles, really.
Yeah, I think touching on the school there, you know, if the daughter does attend school, maybe looking into any sort of support services that the school could offer as well. Um, even just making our teachers aware that, you know, this is an issue that's going on, or letting the teachers know when you have actually told your daughter, so that they can keep a really close eye on her as well, and update you if there is, you know, any upset. So when she is coming home, you can, you know, be prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, I think as well it's really important to acknowledge that there's a grieving process that happens at the end of a relationship, and that's for you and your child. And in a way, if you're going through it with your child, there's an opportunity for you to kind of support and role model for them that you can go through something incredibly difficult, but actually you can survive it and potentially come out stronger at the other side. And that's really important learning to support your daughter, to support your child with.
Yeah, I was just going to add, if you do get to the point where you do decide to separate, obviously, like Angharad said, it's just the situation where you're going to have these conversations. Thinking ahead, if you were thinking of how the child arrangements were going to work in the future, a clear set plan in terms of what that would look like is really helpful for neurodivergent children, that we've learned from experience dealing with these cases in the past. And something even such as a nesting arrangement. It may not be something you've heard before, but that is where the children essentially stay in the family home, and each parent kind of goes and comes as in terms of when they have the contact. So it could be a week on, week off arrangement, or splitting the week in half. And just having those kind of set plans, and they'll know exactly when they're seeing each parent, I think would be really helpful, rather than just having an ad hoc arrangement. Okay, so we have our second scenario now, which is, my marriage recently ended very amicably, but my adult children, who are aged 28 and 24, are really struggling to accept it. As the mum, I am really feeling the brunt of it. I have to admit, I did not think this would be a problem, but they are refusing to even speak to me at the moment, saying I have ruined their childhood memories. How can I rebuild the relationship, especially as I am annoyed that they appear to begrudge me for finally living my life? So I'm going to hand over to Angharad for this one.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, this is a really complex and sad situation, isn't it? In that you think it's going to pan out one way and actually it pans out very differently. When we are parents, we kind of assume once our children are a bit older that they need us less and that they rely on us or depend on us less. And certainly for children as they grow into young adults and then adults, that their relationship with parents change. However, what doesn't change is the expectation that you will always be their parent. And by that, usually what it means is that you will always put their needs before yours. And of course, as they get older and they move away from home and they start setting up their new relationships and have an independent life, we forget that as parents, or it becomes less of a prominent thing for us. We get more of an adult relationship with them. But the symbolicness of that parenting relationship, I think, never changes. And that's what sometimes can cause this kind of issue with young adults when their parents separate. So I've worked with quite a few young adults whose parents are separated. The parents may have waited for them to leave home to go to uni, for example, before they separate, or wait until they've gone travelling or set up their own home before they separate. And what these young adults say to me is that they feel like their childhood was like a fraud. They think, oh my gosh, hold on, have my parents stayed together all this time and actually haven't loved one another? Whereas often that is not the case. It's just as they've got older and older, parents realise actually, now that we've retired or now that the children have left home, we haven't got a relationship that makes us both happy. So the first thing I think would be to accept that they have this concern and this anger about, does this mean our childhood was fake? Because that's a natural and normal thing for them to be thinking, but it's to assure them that is not the case, that actually the happy childhood that they think they had, they really, really did have. There was no different agenda happening behind the scenes, but that now that, your parenting job is maybe less obvious, and day to day, maybe your work and health have changed, all these things that happen as we get older. It has meant that you've reevaluated your relationship together. Very often mums get the brunt of it. Very often dads get the brunt of it. But certainly with, depending on the circumstances around the separation, one parent can often get the blame for ruining family life. And again, it's letting the young adults work through this. And the most important thing I would say is that as the adult in this relationship, as the parent in this relationship, that you are the one responsible for keeping the lines of communication open with your adult offspring. It might mean that you send plenty of texts and don't get a response. It might be that you call them and that they don't reply. But this is a phase that you've got to work through together to get out of this and into a new sort of version of family life. But also talking to them about what their worries are. So they may be worried about what happens on their birthday. Who do they go to? It might be that all the family traditions that they've always held on to are now suddenly different, because who do they go to at Christmas time or Easter time or at the holiday times? How do they divide their time up? Who do they tell first about big news in their lives? How do they figure out seating plans for their wedding? Suddenly, for young adults, that it can feel very, very burdensome to be thinking of how to keep family life going when parents have split up. So talking to them about this, accepting their concerns about this, again, kind of saying that there's no real quick solution here, or you don't have all the answers, but you want to work with them towards that. And I doubt either of your children would resent you having a life of happiness and joy. It's just that they'll be feeling very, very sad and cross that it's not going to be happening with a family that's all they've ever known and assumed would carry on forever. So I'd say it's a difficult transition time. There'll be lots of emotions. Keep the lines of communication open. Try and understand their position, because even though they are adults, they're still very young adults. They're still very much establishing their lives and trying to figure out who they are, what they want from life. So allowing them a bit of freedom to be tantrumy and to be unreasonable and to be really cross, I think is good. If you can manage to tolerate that, then you will get out the other end and continue to have really, really good relationships with them.
Yeah, that's spot on. Thank you for that. Does anyone have anything else to add on that one before I read out the next? No, we'll crack on then. So the next scenario, so they say, I have 50-50 custody with my ex, my children's mother. Throughout our relationship, she was very controlling and volatile. After a week with their mum, our children, aged 6 and 8 years old, returned to me very upset, confused, and angry. Their good behaviour goes out the window. They tell me there are no rules at mum's and they game all the time, and she lets them go out to wander the streets by themselves. What can I do about this from a legal perspective, and how can I support them emotionally? Well, firstly, with this, I'm sure Sophie will agree, this is something we see quite regularly with our cases. I think, first of all, I just want to pull out the controlling and volatile comments. From a legal standpoint, it may be worth you putting your concerns in writing to their mother, either with an email or a text message, so that you can screenshot that. And really future planning in case you need to rely on that in future if you do end up in court. If it's in writing, then nothing can be misconstrued, but if it was a verbal conversation, it leaves room for misinterpretation or someone manipulating it, for example. So I suppose keeping a clear record of any concerns, first of all, is really important. Like I say, we can use that as evidence within proceedings if it does go that far, and it'll give the judge a really clear idea of what your concerns were and when they began and how you raised them in the first instance. Sophie, I know you've probably had quite a bit of experience in this. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So essentially with this one, I think it's important to think about whether it's a different difference in parenting styles, or it's actually a safeguarding concern. So a difference in parenting style, for example, could be having too much screen time, whereas the other parent likes, the children to go outside more. That is a difference in parenting style, and a social worker or the court wouldn't see that as a safeguarding concern as such. Whereas, if the mother's allowing them to wander the streets, are they in, next to a busy road, are they putting themselves in danger, etc. So you need to think about differentiating between the two. If it is just a difference in parenting style, then this is why having a successful co-parenting relationship is so important, and being able to open those lines of communication to discuss these issues. You're always going to have some disagreements in relation to bedtimes, or what they eat, or what they do when they have contact with each parent, but you need to kind of draw the line as to, if there's something that you really don't agree on, then being able to have that conversation and express your views about that. And if you're finding it difficult to do that, or there's just no lines of communication directly, then you can look at support services such as family mediation services, or family therapy, which I'm sure Nina can pass on to after I've spoken. He'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that. But essentially, it's trying to develop that co-parenting relationship as much as you can. And if it is a safeguarding concern and you're really thinking that the children are no longer safe, you do have a 50-50 arrangement, as you said, at the moment, then is it a case where you don't think that's a safe arrangement for the children anymore? And then are we thinking of ways to change that arrangement? And in order to do that, then again, it's exploring those out of court dispute resolution options, which is usually instructing a solicitor to write to them to put forward a proposal, or attending mediation to see if you can reach an agreement. And then the last resort would be making an application to court to consider whether the arrangement should change. Likely, if it's a 50-50 arrangement, it would be probably an application that you are looking to have the children live with you all of the time. Those applications are very difficult, as it is very much the court's view that, children benefit from having both parents in their lives, unless there's very good reason to not have that. The other thing as well, if there's a really serious safeguarding concern, then it can be a referral to children's services at the local authority as well. But just to caveat that with, it should be a serious concern where the children are, at a risk of immediate harm. But essentially that's my view on it. I think, Nina, I don't know if you've got anything to add in terms of the kind of therapy coaching aspect.
Yeah, sure. I think really taking care of those transitions would be a great thing to do. So perhaps anticipating the fact that there might be some big feelings when they come back from their mum's house, and having a special activity that you do together, maybe kind of sitting and having hot chocolate or something. And it's an opportunity for them to open up and share how they're feeling. I think it's good to not press or force them to share what's going on for them, but just kind of offering some spaces where that opportunity is available for them to open up. And I think kind of role modeling, talking about feelings as well. I don't mean that we should sort of share our problems with our children, but I think it's really good if we can just say to them, I'm feeling sad, or I'm struggling at the moment, just to role model for them that that's a healthy thing to do. You might consider using play a little bit as well. So you could kind of do like a role reversal where they get to be the parents and you're the child, and just kind of see what emerges in that play, because it's another opportunity for them to kind of explore and process their feelings. But I think generally just focusing on that attachment relationship. So I would recommend a minimum of 20 minutes kind of focused time with them each day. And that's time where you put your devices away and you're doing an activity together that they really enjoy and that perhaps they've chosen to do with you. But I'm happy to talk to you one-to-one if that's helpful as well.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add on that one?
Could I just add in very quickly, Sophie, about how difficult parenting with somebody that you've got lots of maybe rage and hurt and cross feelings about is really, really tricky. And whereas pre-separation, when we parent, we have different styles, like you were saying, Sophie, about it's just you have different ways of doing things, different boundaries, different rules. And whereas you can sort of tolerate those differences when you are together, it becomes very hard to tolerate them when you have separated, and suddenly they become a thing that you criticize, that you might feel quite concerned about. And this is all about control as well. I think co-parenting is a very, very delicate and tricky process of letting go of control for part of the time of your child's life, but also then appropriately maintaining control when it is your time with your children. And I think it could just take a while to manage all of that and to get to sort of a nice sort of balance, really. So yeah, just wanted to add that in.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to our fourth scenario then. So my ex will not communicate with me about our children at all. Similar to the last one in a way. I have tried everything, including the parenting apps and suggesting mediation, but he will not respond. When he comes to pick them up, he waits in the car. I always hoped we would be able to co-parent, but it seems to be becoming a very distant reality. How can I make him respond or communicate with me? There is no child arrangements order in place, but in the main, he sticks to the usual drop-off and pick-up times. So at least the kids spend time with him. So again, as we've just touched on, it's an extremely difficult one when you've got someone who just is not cooperating at all. Some suggestions from us that seem to have kind of worked in the past in our previous cases is involving a neutral third party, which again is not always easy to find, but if there's someone who continues to be part of the children's lives, or there's just a kind of neutral family member or friend that you could ask to help facilitate that communication and almost act as a mediator, an informal mediator, then it can really help, and especially just to ease the tension and sometimes just bring you out of the kind of heat of the scenario and allow you to see the bigger picture. Another thing that we've used before, which does help, is a handover book, which seems very formal and it doesn't really promote that kind of direct communication. However, it allows each parent to kind of make a note of any key aspects that have came up during their contact with the child, such as, I don't know, if they had to be taken to the doctor and they got given a certain medication, for example, or something happened at school, anything that you kind of need to update the other parent on, that can be helpful as well. And there does ideally need to be some form of communication, like we say, especially for those emergency scenarios. Each parent with parental responsibility deserves the right to know where their child is and what's happening to them. So any way you can try and improve that relationship, the better, really. More kind of on the serious end, if it does end up going to court and there is a child arrangements order, with the parenting apps, the court can include a parenting app in the order and can direct both parties to use that. We are such big advocates of parenting apps and we suggest them all the time. And often if you have suggested a parenting app formally, if a legal professional or the court or a judge recommends one, the other party is more likely to listen and take it on board, unfortunately. But we do see really good results for them, and they have everything written down, it's recorded, so there's no ambiguity. It removes any kind of arguments in terms of he said, she said type thing. So that is something that, worst case scenario, as we always say with court proceedings, it's the last resort, but it is something that can be included in a court order, which I think is really important. All right. Does anyone else have anything to add on that one?
No, you've covered it, Sophie, really well. In that case, then I'll move on to the next question. So this one says, my partner and I separated about a year ago. We are not married. In the last 6 months, she has slowly started to reduce the amount of time I have with the kids. They're 7 and 9 years old. She has a new partner and thinks she wants to play happy families with him. However, I am their dad and I want to spend more time with them. Is there anything I can do legally, as we were never married? The short answer is yes. However, there are a few things we need to address first of all to see how we can go about that. So number one is the question of parental responsibility. Parental responsibility is essentially all of the rights and responsibilities that the law gives you when you're caring for a child, normally a parent. This is everything from the day-to-day decisions about what they're eating for their breakfast, but also bigger decisions such as what school they're going to attend. The reason it's very important in this case is unmarried fathers, they don't automatically have parental responsibility unless they're named on the child's birth certificate. So if you do have parental responsibility and there's no court order currently in place, it's important to know that your parental responsibility is actually equal to the mother, even though they may be living with the mother more days in the week at the minute than with you. She still shouldn't be dictating the arrangements to you. I know you say that you slowly started to reduce the amount of time that you have. You really need to try and open up that conversation, explain that this should be a mutual decision about how often the children are spending time with you rather than a unilateral one. Just going back to the parental responsibility. So if it turns out that you weren't named on the birth certificate, you can apply to court for a parental responsibility order. And at the same time look to increase the contact. So that's step one, parental responsibility. Step two is really the contact itself. So Sophie, do you want to explain about how we would go about increasing contact if a client came to us?
Yes, of course. So like I've touched on earlier in this chat, essentially we do whatever we can to try and resolve things outside of court where we can. Court is always a last resort, and this is mainly because the court do have a no order principle, so they will only ever make a child arrangements order where they truly think it's necessary. So our initial and first port of call is always to try and resolve it outside of court, and the first area that we can explore is by negotiation. So you would come to us, we would have a meeting, we would discuss all of the scenarios and what you are seeking to achieve, and we would prepare a formal letter to them and send that once you've approved it and you're happy with it, suggesting what you want the arrangements to be, essentially. You can also explore mediation, which we've touched on before. Just to go into a bit more detail about that, it's where an independent third party, a trained mediator, would sit with you both and facilitate the agreement. So there's no kind of formalities in that. It doesn't create a binding agreement as such. It's just to open those lines of communication, and hopefully you can reach an agreement with any kind of formalities and attending court hearings and going before a judge, etc. And then the final port of call, like I said, it is making an application to court for a child arrangements order. One that is really helpful is if you were able to reach an agreement via the other two methods of negotiation or mediation, then you can have a child arrangements order without going to all of the court hearings. So what you can do is you can file the order by consent. So it's an administrative exercise essentially. So it avoids you having to go to all of these court hearings, have the representation there. It can be very stressful going to court. It's an alien kind of environment for everybody. It's not very pleasant. So this kind of removes that worry from people. And if you are able to reach an agreement, it's a great one to have that child arrangements order by consent, because you still have the binding agreement, you have that court order, there's repercussions if one party were to breach the agreement and the order. But like I said, you can avoid going through that long and extended court process, which can take anywhere between kind of 9 months to 18 months, depending on the complexities of the case. So that's essentially the process in a nutshell. Does anyone else have anything else they want to add on that?
Just one point, just to piggyback yours essentially, Sophie. Just if you were able to reach that agreement and, as you say, put it through as the consent order, so not going through all of the hearings. Certainly if we were representing you, that's something we would always recommend, because it just gives you that security for future and that peace of mind. And like Sophie says, if the other person does then breach that order, there are serious repercussions.
Great, Orla, thank you. Okay, so that is all of our scenarios done. So we're now going to move on to our Q&A session. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, please pop them in the chat box and we'll try and answer as many as we can. We do have one in our Q&A box at the moment, which has been directed to Angharad, so I hope you don't mind having a little go at this one. So I'll just hand over to you, Angharad, and yeah, if you can answer that. That would be great. Thank you.
Oh, I haven't looked at it. Here we go. So, I
can read it if that would be easier for you.
Yes, please. Yes.
No problem. So this says, I separated from my partner 2 years ago. It was a long partnership of 23 years. There was some forceful and unusual behaviour witnessed by the children from the ex towards me, which confused them to start with. The children were introduced to the new partner well before I knew they were together. Every time I was away with work, they would sleep together in the family home with the children present. The ex has left me for a same-sex partner, and I have spent time early on helping them to understand that some families have two mummies or two daddies. However, every time I see them, they have clear confusion over same-sex people kissing and sharing the same bed. The whole thing breaks my heart, but what else can I do to, one, support them, and two, be able to handle these questions that hurt me myself? I have attended therapy, but it still hurts me having to support them through this journey and confusion. We all clearly need support, but I do not know where to go. Thank you.
Gosh, yes.
I appreciate that was a big one. Sorry.
There's a lot to contend with, isn't it, for all of you? Thinking about the children, first of all, they're probably at a different stage of processing this information, and children, especially children these days, have a very different approach to gender, sexuality, what they think of as a standard family. So it may be that actually, even though there's some confusion there, 'cause it's different to when you were together with your ex, that actually they can adapt to that. And what we know about children is that their representation of families is very symbolic. So it's about the relationship, but how they feel. So they can, over time, get through and process the gender issue, the sexuality issue, as long as they still feel loved, attended to, thought about, and have some sense of sort of consistency in life. So that's them. And there are things that you can do to help them. We know that, for example, therapy for children going through separation can be helpful, but it's not helpful if parents are still arguing, basically. So at the end of the day, how children get through a separation is unfortunately pretty much entirely dependent on how the parents do it. And that's an awful lot of burden and responsibility when you're already feeling quite shattered and brokenhearted yourself. So well done you for getting therapy. Well done you for starting on that journey towards trying to figure out something that is just mind-boggling. And time will heal, time will help. And the most important thing is that your relationship with your children continues, even if you're right in the middle of the storm right now. Don't let go of that relationship. Stay part of their lives. Be confused with them. Be upset with them. If, you know, you could say, I still feel sad and I just trying to get my head around this. But try and be there with them and for them as much as possible. We do know from separated parents that, as brokenhearted as you feel now, that actually you can get a better life after this all calms down, after the storm has passed. So it's to have hope and optimism for that as well. But look after yourself, get as much therapy, as much support, as much time to process it as you need, and just try and keep hold of the children. Having that relationship with your children is the most important thing you could do for your children now, and trying to minimize conflict with your ex, however cross and annoyed you are, is also a biggie for children and how they get through a separation. So an awful lot to get through, and I feel for you hugely, but there is hope, I'd like to say.
Nina, do you have anything you'd like to add on this one?
I think I would agree with what Angharad said. And, you know, I think having gone through divorce myself, just kind of echoing that sense of optimism that actually, like for me, co-parenting has been a really positive experience. So it doesn't have to be the case that children lose out in that situation.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we've got a few other questions. We'll just answer one. It relates to school. So the question is, what happens if we can't decide on a school? My child is not school age yet, but we're going to be applying for school and we've split up. What happens now? So this doesn't become an issue unless you can't agree on which school you're going to send them to. So if you both have parental responsibility, as Orla touched on earlier, this falls under this. So education falls under parental responsibility, meaning the decision should be made jointly as to where they go to school. If you're struggling to agree on which school they go to, again, it's a case of trying to open those lines of communication, having those discussions. Is it a case of you can instruct a lawyer to assist you in that and facilitate that negotiation with you both? Or is it maybe a mediation issue that you could sit and just go to maybe one session just to have someone else sit there and help you kind of reach an agreement? If you are unable to reach an agreement, then it is an application to court, but it's a different application to court than a child arrangements order, as I touched on earlier. So this application is known as a specific issue order, and as it says on the tin, it deals with any specific issue when it comes to children, and that falls under schooling essentially. So what you are asking the court to do when you are making this application is to decide which school your child is to go to. So the court will be telling you that it is not a judge's decision to make that the judge shouldn't have to make that decision for your child. It's your child, and you are the parents, you know what's best for them. So judges don't want to make these decisions because they're so personal to the families themselves and what, you know, the parents want to their children to achieve in their lives and in their education. However, if you are really struggling to come to that agreement, then it would be asking the court to make that decision on your behalf.
Just to add to that, Sophie, I actually had a case recently that did go all the way to a final hearing on a specific issue order application, and it was in relation to a children's school placement. It was, you know, mum and dad. Mum had a school in mind, dad had a school in mind. The judge did make some comments at that final hearing that they were essentially being asked to flip a coin. Thinking worst case scenario, if it does end up in court, what you really need to think about is, why is my school in the child's best interests? That's what the courts are wanting from you. Make their job easier for them. If you do go all the way to a final hearing, you probably will be asked to provide a statement. And it's essentially at that point, it's one parent's, you know, choice against the other. So the top tips really for that are try and get as much third party evidence as you can. The likes of reports, third party reports, Ofsted reports of, you know, what the school quality is like, how far would that journey be, and what would the commute be for the school run? You know, are they going to be travelling, you know, over an hour to go to school and have to get up really early, or is it a school that's, you know, equal distance from both parents' property, so that, you know, they wouldn't have to travel as much? All of those extra sort of things that you need to think about is, like I say, you're really trying to convince the court why it's in, you know, your child's best interest to go with your chosen school. Like I say, and Sophie said, it's a really hard decision for the court to make, because it is sort of one party's word against the other. So the more evidence you can get to back up your decision, the better.
Great, Orla, thank you. Okay, we've got another question that's come through. I'll just read that out so everyone is aware. So I'm recently separated and living together separately with our 3 children temporarily. My husband will be moving to his mother's in the future, again temporarily. My question is regarding safeguarding. So my sister-in-law is married to a convicted rapist. Our decision as a married couple has been to not have any contact with her and her husband. However, they visit my mother-in-law's house where my husband will be living and our children will stay there too. I don't know if this is a safeguarding issue or really looking for advice to navigate the situation. It definitely would be considered a safeguarding issue. We've dealt with numerous cases where there's kind of similar issues concerning partners of mums or dads. So if you have real concern, like I touched on earlier, then it would be a referral to the local authority and to children's services and they can carry out an investigation as to whether they think it's a risk, and they can also put safeguarding measures in place so they can, essentially advise that the child or children on around that person. If it ended up needing an application to court because of your concerns, then the safeguarding issues would become a part of that. So CAFCAS are the Court Advisory Service for Children, and they deal with all safeguarding issues. And what they would do is carry out their own safeguarding checks particularly to this particular individual. And if there is a risk of the child or children being around them, then again the measures would be put in place to prevent that contact at all. So it's definitely a safeguarding concern. It's just depending on how often they have contact with that person and whether you can kind of trust those around you to safeguard the children. And if you can't, then it's going to have to be a safeguarding referral. Anything to add on that one, Orla?
No, you covered all bases. Yeah, key takeaway with that is if you do have really serious concerns, I know, a lot of families don't want the local authority involved in their own family, but they're there for a reason. They can do the likes of risk assessments, they can help you out, they can make reports, they give their unbiased advice. So yeah, hit the nail on the head there, Sophie.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've got another one, which is my children have said they don't want to stay with me and only want to stay with their other parent. They blame me for the relationship breakdown. I'm their biological parent, so surely I have a right to see them, but it really hurts. They don't want to be with me. So we've kind of covered this in the past, but Nina, Angharad, do you want to touch on this one?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be interested in how old the children are. And the reason that is an important consideration is just how children think about quite complex situations changes as their brains develop. So it might be that they're at the age where to make sense of it all, they need a goodie and a baddie. And in their mind currently, they're thinking of you as the baddie and the other parent as the goodie. So it's a really difficult and heartbreaking situation. In terms of psychologically, I think it's important to keep that communication going, to keep that relationship going in whatever form possible, and to accept the messy feelings that kids can have often towards their parents. And as much as possible, not feed into sort of blame or sense of who's done the right or the wrong thing, because that just feeds their sort of quite categorical way of seeing the world. So I know that feels like it's asking you to be kind of superheroic in terms of rising above the emotional mess that is around, but as much as possible, just trying to keep those lines of communication going, acknowledging their feelings. I get it that you're angry and that you're sad and it's all very complicated right now, but I love you and I still want to be in your life, and let's just see how we can sort of keep that going forward. So I know it feels like a very tiny solution to a very, very big problem, but I would say they're the main things to kind of bear in mind, is just thinking about the future and what kind of relationship, or to have a continuing relationship with children, because we know that for them, having both parents in their lives is still the most important thing for their outcomes, really, from separation.
Thank you. I'll pick up another one. So this one says, to my shame, I've been the working father and not spent as much time with my children as I know I should have. I really regret this now. My wife and I have split up. What can I do to rectify my relationship with my kids? So probably another one for yourself, Angharad, and Nina.
I guess my advice would be to sort of try and look for the common ground. So kind of find places where you share interests with your children and just start to kind of build on those. And I think also just making space for their feelings. So if they have some difficult feelings about that, just offering them some validation and a space for that. And perhaps for you as well, there might be a sense of loss to overcome for the time that you've missed with your children. So just generally kind of exploring all of those feelings together and seeing what is working well at the moment that you can build on.
Yeah, and just to add to that about a sense of having, well, a sense of confidence in your skills as a parent as well. Being a parent, you get better at it the more you do it in many ways. And you may feel like you haven't had the opportunity to build up those skills. And there are lots of really brilliant parenting guides, parenting workshops. And it is absolutely not an admittance of failure to go to parenting workshops at all, or to seek support in how to parent. It's not something that we just know naturally how to do. We need to learn how to do it. So if that would help you also to feel confident, to be the parent that you want to be to them, then I would strongly advise that. And, yeah, strongly encourage you to do that, really. Time is very important, and children don't need masses of it. Like Nina was saying earlier on, about 20 minutes a day, that kind of sense of, it doesn't have to be hours and hours and hours, that just time and affection and consistency and reliability, these are big things that can help build up that relationship to where you want it to be.
Great. And just a point for me to end, just because one parent hasn't had as much contact with the child, how a court would see it, it's not a complete kind of bar to them ever having a relationship in the future. All you would need to do is show that commitment, and like you said, you've developed that relationship over time. It's not going to be something that can happen overnight, but as long as you can show that commitment, you show that you have a clear intention to have a solid relationship with these children, then a court or whoever is dealing with this issue would see that. Perfect. So our next question then is, the relationship with my ex-partner is at rock bottom and we keep clashing over the children. Are we better to consider moving to a parallel parenting approach? And do you think this is a good idea? So this is not something that personally I've came across much, and not many people suggest it, to be perfectly honest. A parallel parenting approach is essentially where there's a lot of high conflict, and it is minimal contact with the other parent, essentially. So it kind of, goes against everything that we've been pushing during this chat, focusing on co-parenting relationships and improving that communication. This is a sort of scenario where the situation is so bad that having that contact is just making things worse. So having the minimal contact, where you are just dealing with arrangements for the children and considerations about them solely, is that's the approach, essentially. And it can work, as Angharad touched on earlier. The children would pick up on unhappy parents and unhappy separated parents. Particularly, they pick up on a lot more than I think a lot of parents realize, especially at kind of handover points and things, and even looks, gestures. They consume it all. So I think if it gets to the point where you've explored all of the options of trying to make that communication work, then it's potentially something that can work, as long as it keeps everything as kind of amicable as possible, really. Does anyone else have anything else to add on that one?
Just a very quick point about this research looking at sort of outcomes for children, and children whose parallel parents, don't have as good at outcomes as children whose parents cooperatively parent, which is obvious, really. We would, I guess, at that, wouldn't we? But what it did show is that there's potentially a sort of phased approach. So maybe right now, parallel parenting is the best that you can both do, and that is fine. And then maybe as the dust settles, as things settle a little bit more, and you just start feeling a bit better about things, both of you in general, that there might be then an opportunity to move towards more cooperative parenting, whether that's in 6 months, a year, 2 years. So even if you're parallel parenting now, it might not always be this is how it has to be. So bearing that in mind.
Brilliant, thank you. Nina, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think, even if you're in that kind of parallel parenting situation, I think it's still important to kind of maintain positivity about your ex-partner in front of the children. So I think kind of trying to connect with something about them that you appreciate, even if it's just that they're a committed parent, so that you can kind of share that attitude with the children. You're helping to kind of maintain a positive atmosphere within the family, and the other parent in a sense is part of them, so it's great if you can sort of support that relationship the best you can.
Thank you, Nina. So we're nearing on past now, so I'll just do a little round up. I suppose before we sign off, I don't know if we want to go around maybe and give some top tips or some key takeaways, a lasting bit of advice maybe that we can give everyone that's joined today. So certainly from a legal aspect, when we're dealing with children post-separation, and it's written into the law itself, and judges will tell you at every hearing, the paramount consideration of the court is the children. So set your differences aside that you have with the other parent potentially. Our focus, and certainly the court's focus, is always, and it'll be echoed to you, I'm sure, is what is in the child's best interest. Anyone want to go next with your key takeaway or top tip?
Oh, well, Orla, just because mine kind of piggybacks on the back of yours, essentially. And mine is essentially just to try and see the bigger picture. People get so entrenched in the past and what's previously happened, and as much as that will be difficult, especially if you've experienced, difficult scenarios in the past with that partner, the best way to resolve that is to, first of all, take advantage of any resources that we have. So, for example, speaking to people like Angharad and Nina, and getting that kind of support there for you to kind of deal with those issues. And then just think to the future and think what would create the best kind of environment for our children moving forward. And the key takeaway I'd be saying is if you can create some sort of co-parenting relationship that works, and you have some form of communication, however that is, whether that is literally as minimal as a handover book where you don't have any direct communication, or all the way up to attending events and going to school plays and things together, then wonderful. But if you can create some sort of amicable relationship that your children can look on, and it would just create a happier environment for everybody.
Yeah, I would say get more support than you think you need, because being a solo parent is incredibly challenging. I think there are creative ways that you can approach it. For example, finding other single parents to kind of share cooking. There are some Facebook groups you can join about kind of going on single parent holidays and this kind of thing. So just kind of finding different ways to meet those needs and finding some support and community through the process.
And my tips would just be what we know from research, and what that tells us is that for children, they will do so much better if there are sort of three things present in a divorce and a separation. One is that they are not exposed to frequent conflict, that they don't lose a relationship with a parent, and also that their difficult feelings are given some kind of space, that they're not denied. So if you can manage those three things, then your children are much more likely to get out of this okay.
That's brilliant. Well, on behalf of Stowe Family Law, thank you for me and Sophie. A massive thank you, Angharad, for coming along and giving all of your really helpful advice today. And Nina as well, thank you for all your helpful tips and tricks. So just a reminder to everyone that's watching, this session will be available on YouTube to rewatch. So if there was something you didn't quite catch or you'd like to go over, please go and check that out. There's also on the Stowe website, there's a wealth of free resources there. So please take advantage of them. The next breakup club will be on the 12th of June, and this is surrounding the family court. So if that's something that interests you, please do come along. There will be an email that will be sent out, so keep an eye on that and our social channels as well. And that's it from us. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.